Monday night basketball in the nation's capital. Rough start for the Wizards basketball week. Back at home, taking on the Cleveland Cavaliers for the first of 3 games at home before they head out on a long West Coast road trip. Even with some familiar faces in the house. Final score was 114-91. Washington takes their 3rd loss in a row. Now we here are coming up on Postgame Live with a discussion, an honest one, about what went wrong, what went right, and how do they get this thing back on track as they get ready to face off against the Charlotte Hornets on Wednesday. Wes Hall here with Christy Winters-Scott. Of course, we'll be joined by Chris, Drew, and Megan here in a moment. But Christy, as I said just moments ago, an honest conversation.
Right. This
one from the beginning was a wire-to-wire win for the Cavs. The Wizards never had a lead tonight. And I think it all got started with the turnover situation early on the game.
Absolutely. The empty turnovers that Washington had in the first half, they just never turned the corner with that. And then the 3-ball wasn't falling. So sometimes that gets frustrating. It feels like, well, we're just not making shots. But they were making shots inside. And they went to that a little bit in the second half, a little bit more. But I think at the end of the day, it was an effort situation. I thought on the glass, when you are getting out-rebounded, and I know Cleveland had some size, and I know Washington is missing 2 of their big 3. I get it.
That's where I was going to go.
But at the same time, there's got to be even more so of an attention to detail on the rebounding and getting a body on somebody. And I just thought there was like a little lack of fire in the belly in that regard. But I think it all trickled into also not taking care of the basketball. I thought some of the turnovers were unforced. I thought they were just passes in the passing lane where they saw the defender right there, and Cleveland went the other way, and they really had their way in the fast break situation. So definitely frustrating tonight. 3 in a row in the loss column for the Wizards, but nothing that can't be fixed with some practice, nothing that can't be fixed with healthy bodies back on the floor. I mean, we haven't seen, I heard Drew say this, we haven't seen the big 3 on the court for more than 3 solid full games this season. And so that's frustrating too, because when they're whole, they're great. And when they have that chemistry going, and we've seen it, right? But now it's the ability to sustain it that's been the issue in the last 3 games, which is why they've come up on the short end.
Oh, that's what you actually bring up the great point, which is the absence of Kyle Kuzma, the absence of Bradley Beal has a real tremendous effect, because when you look at Cleveland scoring, Donovan Mitchell had 21, Darius Garland 23, Jared Allen 23, Evan Mobley had 16. So you see what the top part of a roster being available can do for you, and then adversely you see the absence of those 2 and how it had adverse effects for the Wizards. But you did see something positive. We had a Will Barton sighting tonight. He gave you 15 off the bench. That was obviously something appreciated. Monte Morris gave you 10. Daniel Gafford with 11. Kristaps Porzingis with 18 and 7. Denny Avdija with 12 and 4. Denny, 12 and 4 is a pretty good game for him. But all in all, you talk about the turnovers, whether it's retaining possession, quality possessions with the on ball. How much fixing needs to happen between now and Wednesday? If we're in practice tomorrow, let's move ahead in speculation. But if we're in practice tomorrow, what are we working on to tweak and adjust to correct that by Wednesday?
Mentality. That's the number one thing. The approach, right? Just to understand, I mean, they're pros. They're pros for a reason. They understand the assignment. They know what needs to be done. But the key component is the focus factor, right? You have to be focused and locked into the details, and the little things become big things when you have turnovers like that. They multiply, then you get frustrated. I saw some body language tonight. Just the shots weren't falling, and it's like, oh man, But you have to be able to weather that storm. You have to be able to understand that it's not always going to go in. It's not always going to be a good pass. So what's the next play going to look like? The same thing? Or something different, because you're locked in and saying, hey, we're not going to do that, right? So the focus for practice is, hey, let's come into this practice like we need to have this be a good practice in terms of our focus and effort and attention to detail.
I appreciate that. Detail it is. Let's bring in Chris and Drew and get their thoughts on it. Gentlemen, good call as always. But again, the question comes down to Washington trying to shake the hangover from those 2 back-to-back losses. And here we are at home facing a different way of losing tonight. Chris and Drew, how do we correct this?
Oh, you starting with me now?
You did this to me earlier. You looked at me first to go first, so I'm going to look at you now for you to go first.
Look, the Cleveland Cavaliers are a whole team, and they're really, really good. They've got, in my opinion, 2 all-stars in the backcourt, and then you've got special bigs, and they space the floor out. And now you've got a guy like Okoro as their 5th starter scoring. They're really good. You give credit where credit is due. But this Wizards team was never in the fight tonight. And it's not an effort thing. It's just the team that they played was just better. This Cleveland Cavaliers team is #1 in defensive rating for a reason. They're now 16-1 when they hold teams under 100 points. The Wizards scored 91 tonight, 19 in the fourth quarter, and I know it kind of got away from them. But you just give credit to J.B. Bickerstaff's squad coming in here taking care of business on the second night of a back-to-back. They beat Indiana last night in the Heartland.
I'm going to say that the Wizards, this has all been mental for them. I think Christy has hit it right on the head. This is about mentality right now. A lot of moving parts going on right now. You lost 2 games up 20-plus points after having a phenomenal 6-game road winning streak. You get a game postponed against Detroit in Detroit. You get 4 days rest before you get to go in and play the Portland Trail Blazers at home. You lose that game. Then you go to Brooklyn. They don't have Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, no Ben Simmons.
No T.J. Warren.
Seth Curry leaves the game with a hamstring pull, a groin issue, and you lose a 25-point lead, and you lose that game. So your mentality coming into this ball game, along with the trade deadline coming up, am I going to be here type of mentality, you're going to get games like this. You kind of lose the game before you show up. And to mention what Chris and to bring up what Chris brought up, when you start naming off these stats and what type of team the Cleveland Cavaliers are, especially on the defensive end, you're going to have these type of games.
Christy?
Listen, when you said about the effort, Chris, now mentality is effort, right? It's not just running up and down, jumping up and down. It's your approach. And that's why, Drew, I was giving you like several snaps because you understood what I meant. When I'm talking about effort, it's not effort like on a box out, like physically. It's effort to know when to get into that body, how to get into that body, how to hold your position inside. So it's a focus issue for me. So it's not necessarily they got out, I don't know, personneled. I just think it was a mental challenge tonight for Washington, and that can be fixed, like going into the next practice with a stronger approach. So it's not a physical situation for me because I've coached and played, so have you guys, and you understand that half the time, it's more than half the time, it's a mental approach that you take and the confidence and belief in what you're doing, and it carries over game after game. So that's what I meant. So I just wanted to clarify that.
With that in mind, guys, we look at the game and some might say, these were quote unquote the old junk minutes phrase, right? But when you're looking at certain lineups that had Anthony Gill in there, you see Will Barton as well, Denny Avdia, these guys are taking advantage of the last few moments that they have. What did you see out of the quote unquote effort of those guys late down the stretch during, Chris?
I mean, to be honest, everybody was kind of dazed and confused, just in a brain fog. Not having Kyle Kuzma tonight or Brad, you looked for somebody else to step up offensively. You know what's the most demoralizing thing in a basketball game? Having to go back and play defense after you keep missing. That is not fun. You play this game to get buckets. You play this game to put points on the board. That's what the fans come to see. I know fans want to see you play defense, but they want to see some highlight dunks. They want to see some tip dunks. They want to see some crossovers, guys falling down, some exciting basketball, and that happens on the offensive end. And when you don't have Kyle Kuzma and Bradley Beal tonight, other guys got to step up and knock down shots and at least take them. And tonight, playing against a juggernaut defensive team like the Cleveland Cavaliers, who only allowed 31 three-point attempts, which is #1 for their opponents, you have to shoot, and you have a smaller window. You have to take your shot when you can, and more importantly, you got to make it.
That's what it all comes down to. Chris and Drew, thanks you guys so much. We'll see you guys on Wednesday when the Charlotte Hornets come to town, so hopefully the Wizards will be able to jump back in the dub column.
You guys have a good night.
Like you guys enjoy, Chris. I want to bring in Megan McPeak. Megan quickly asked, they talked about the three-point shooting tonight. Washington shooting 21% from behind the arc. We talked about it in pregame, hoping that the three ball would fall, but unfortunately not being able to get that done today.
No, and sometimes that's just, unfortunately, that's the way the cookie crumbles. The shots aren't necessarily going to fall every single night. And tonight was the night that they don't fall when you need them to fall, especially when you think of the fact, as you all have spoken to already, no Kuz and no Brad. And, when you look at the two of them missing, I think the aspect, aside from them scoring, it's also their facilitating that they bring to the basketball game. And you heard, ahead of the game, Coach Unseld Jr. say that in that Brooklyn game, before he went down with the ankle injury, Kuz facilitated on 18 points in that Brooklyn game in 11 minutes. That shows you how impactful he is. So although his scoring might not have been there right off the bat in that game, he was facilitating. And I think that's another aspect, not having them in the lineup, that you lose. But you've got to put that aside and forget about it. You cannot deal with the fact that you don't have them. You have to just accept it going into the game, and you have to do what Chris said. You have to play with the effort for 48 minutes. And we saw that from a Brooklyn Nets team the other night. You did not have your big three, and we saw the effort that Christy was illustrating perfectly that night, and it just wasn't there tonight, unfortunately.
Go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, Megan, you get it. You understand when you have people missing, everyone else has to pick up their game. And that sounds like very cliche. And sometimes it's difficult because chemistry. You saw a couple times the zig and the zag situations where the ball just got turned over on flat passes across passing lanes. So that doesn't typically happen. And I get it. There are different people on the floor with you at any given moment. So you just have to be, that more focused, right? That much more focused on who's out there with you, who can come and meet this pass. All the little things have to be amped up. All the little things are magnified when you're down a couple of players. And they've been,
Hey, look,
it's been
Glenn
frustrating.
Contour says it all the time. KYP, know your personnel, right?
Exactly. But it's not just
Exactly.
defensively.
No, it's all,
It's your
everybody's
teammates,
responsible for
too.
that. If you're on the court, you got to know who's out there and what they can do and how
Not-
to utilize it. Go ahead,
Not
Megan.
even just
Yeah.
on the court. If you're on the bench, you have to KYP, because Will Barton's a perfect example. You could get called at a moment's notice. And one thing I will note, Wes and Christy, keep in mind, Jordan Goodwin is on a 2A contract. He is getting very close to his threshold of games that he can play in when it comes to the NBA. That plays a role when you think of the fact you don't know how long you're going to be without Bradley Beal and Kyle Kuzma. So they have to be very judicious with bringing Jordan Goodwin into these games and making him active, because once he hits that threshold, he can't play with the NBA team anymore unless they convert his contract.
And that's something
Very
that we will
interesting.
definitely keep our finger on as we move forward. Again, that update, of course, coming to you at NBCSportsWashington.com. But, Megan, another person I want to talk about is the third or the last of the three that was available tonight. That's Kristaps Porzingis. Now, mind you, 18 points. But, again, like the rest of the team, struggled from behind the arc. I think he was 1 for 3 from deep. What do we make of how he plays when those two aren't there? Or not necessarily how he plays, but the effect of his game in the absence of Kuz and Brad?
It's interesting because you look at that Brooklyn game, and Coach Unseld said when Brooklyn went small, it became tough on Porzingis. And that makes sense because when he has a big on him, typically he has a size advantage, being 7'3". So he can figure out his spots. He can figure out where his advantages are. He can rise up. He has the high release point. But now you meet him with two guys who are basically his size, who are shot blockers and defenders, who have the long length and the outreach that they can give him a step and respect the fact that KP can put it on the floor, but they can still contest the shot because they've got the long wingspan. And I think that frustrated him in the sense of you now don't have the outlet in a Kuz and a Brad that you would normally have. And you don't also have the outlet in guys of the others outside of, the other two of the big three that were knocking down shots consistently. I thought when they attacked the paint tonight and when they tried to get to the rim, good things happened. It was either getting to the free throw line or they were getting a bucket. And Drew said it as well too on the broadcast. Your advantage is in transition. Get the ball off the glass and move it. And I thought if they could have done that a little quicker and made that adjustment a little earlier in the game rather than continuing to settle for the threes that weren't falling, I thought they would have put themselves in a better position.
Of course, well, again, to your point, the matching up with the height of Cleveland, when we made the adjustment to put Gaff and KP on the floor, the first team that teams mentioned that, hey, we've seen somebody do that. Who was that? Cleveland. It's unfortunate that we weren't able to see our full strength matching their full strength tonight. But when we're all said and done, there are no excuses, and we're going to hear direct answers from head coach Wes Unseld Jr. on the other side when we return to Wizards Postgame Live back in 90 seconds.